Legend has it that in a remote village in Indonesia, there is a death omen known as the Kromoleo. Every night in this village, a procession of demonic, undead village officials with glowing golden eyes appears. They carry an empty coffin and wander through the village streets. Anyone who crosses paths with this funeral procession will suffer a terrible, gruesome death that very night. In truth, these golden-eyed specters are the vengeful spirits of a brutal gang of bandits who were decapitated by the villagers 10 years ago. To enact their bloody revenge, they have summoned dark demonic emissaries. The film we are going to talk about today details a blood-stained village destroyed by the sins of its own flesh and blood. Our story begins 10 years ago. At that time, Indonesia was plagued by a ruthless gang of bandits who practiced dark black magic. They craved the scent of human blood, and the local villagers were tortured and terrorized to the brink of despair. Finally, one day, the villagers could stand it no longer. They banded together, armed themselves, and surrounded the group of human demons out in the wilderness. The leader of the bandits, a sinister man named Jarrett, was personally beheaded by the village elders. But just a split second before his head rolled, he used his final breath to cast a horrific curse upon the entire village. 10 years later, Jarrett's daughter, Zia, who had grown up away from the horror, returns to this unfamiliar, estranged village alongside her boyfriend, Dika. She has traveled back this time to attend her mother's funeral. But the moment they step out of their car, the sky violently bruises over with dark, heavy clouds. Black crows fly low overhead, their cawing sounding like the weeping of restless ghosts. This is definitely a terrible omen. Zia, overwhelmed by grief for her mother, does not pay attention to these dark signs. But as soon as she finishes paying her respects at her mother's grave, her grandfather rushes out like a frantic ghost and demands that they leave immediately. He warns them that it is far too dangerous to stay in the village another night. Zia's mind is full of burning questions. She was sent away to live in the city when she was only 8 years old, and for all these years, she has desperately wanted to know why she was exiled. But her grandfather refuses to give her an answer. He is simply consumed by anxiety, desperately trying to find a car to send them away before night falls. On the other side of town, when the village chief hears the news of Zia's sudden return, his face turns pale with sheer terror. He immediately beats the emergency drums, gathering all the remaining villagers together. He strictly warns everyone to lock their doors, close their windows, and draw their curtains tight. No matter what strange noises they hear or what terrifying sights they glimpse, they must never open their doors or look outside. Otherwise, the bloody slaughter of 10 years ago will repeat itself tonight. If you meet them, whatever you do not look into their golden eyes. Suddenly, the atmosphere across the entire village becomes suffocatingly tense and eerie. Zia and Dika, completely unaware of the looming danger, remain inside the house, organizing her late mother's belongings in the attic. Zia picks up one of her mother's favorite dresses. Smelling the familiar scent lingering on the fabric, her tears begin to flow uncontrollably. But at that exact moment, a blood-red ball suddenly rolls across the floor. Zia looks up and follows it toward the upper loft. There is no one upstairs, yet an old wooden rocking chair is violently swaying back and forth by itself. Before they can even react to the phantom chair, a dust-covered iron box crashes to the floor with a loud, echoing thud right behind them. Zia reaches out, wanting to pull the box closer to see what is hidden inside, but her grandfather suddenly lunges forward and grabs her away. His face is a mask of pure terror. He yells at Zia, dragging both her and Dika out of the house. But when they run out to their vehicle, all three of them are struck dumb. The 4 tires of the car have been completely slashed and destroyed with a heavy knife. The grandfather's face turns blood red with panic. He realizes that someone, or something, is actively preventing them from escaping. He runs frantically back into the house, pulls a dust-covered shotgun from beneath his bed, and orders Dika to accompany him into the village to find another operational vehicle. Unfortunately, Dika proves to be a completely useless teammate. Instead of searching for a car, he wanders off, finds a secluded pavilion, and distracts himself by staring at his laptop screen. Suddenly, a violent flash of lightning splits the sky. The entire village loses power, plunging into a pitch-black, suffocating darkness. Dika, still utterly oblivious to the gravity of the situation, hears a strange, haunting chant echoing from the distance. When he finally looks up, the sight almost tears his soul straight out of his body. Emerging from the dark is a procession of figures clad in black robes, their eyes glowing with a sinister golden light, carrying a massive black coffin as they march toward him step by step. The scene is so nightmarish that Dika panics and flees into the night. At the very same time, 2 security guards patrolling the area and an older woman returning home witness this exact same horrific sight. Having lived in the village for decades, the elderly woman instantly recognizes the deadly legend. White with fear, she runs into her house without looking back. The heavy-set security guard, however, is foolish and ignorant. Not only does he refuse to hide, but he also boldly hurls insults at the approaching phantoms, mocking them as mere gangsters playing dress-up. His timid partner senses the mortal danger, deserts him, and runs for his life, leaving the fat guard entirely alone. The next second, a supernatural force grips the guard. He is violently smashed against a stone pillar over and over again until his breath leaves his body and he collapses to the ground. Before he can even cry out for help, a ghostly apparition floats directly in front of him to claim his life. Meanwhile, the terrified older woman rushes inside her home, shoves her young daughter deep into a closet, and hides beneath her own bed, holding her breath in absolute silence. A second later, the undead specter shatters her defenses. It reaches beneath the bed, violently drags her out, hoists her into the air by her neck, and strangles her to death. Through the narrow gap in the closet door, her little daughter watches her mother die a agonizing death, but she clamps her hands over her mouth, not daring to make a sound. Fortunately, Dika manages to escape the initial onslaught and crosses paths with Zia in the dark woods. He frantically tries to explain the otherworldly horrors he just witnessed, but before he can even finish his sentence, an invisible, spectral hand tightly clamps around his throat. He is hoisted into the air, struggling madly for life. Just then, the grandfather arrives and fires his shotgun into the empty air, breaking the phantom's hold and causing Dika to crash heavily to the ground. As the grandfather guides Dika and Zia through the treacherous forest paths to escape the village limits, he finally reveals the grim truth: those evil ghosts are the vengeful souls of the dark magic bandits slaughtered 10 years ago. They are bound to a horrific curse, and whenever that curse is triggered, they manifest to reap the souls of the living. Anyone who lays eyes on them is marked for death. Suddenly, Dika's ankle is snatched. A decayed, ghostly hand erupts from the soil, dragging him backward. This time, the grandfather is prepared. He pulls a specialized, protective mystical mirror amulet from his vest, using its light to repel the evil spirit. Though saved again, Dika's mind has completely shattered from the terror. Driven mad by fear, he loses all reason and drags Zia blindly deeper into the dark, twisting woods. But how could two city outsiders ever hope to find an exit in an enchanted, cursed forest? They wander aimlessly until they stumble upon a seemingly abandoned house. The moment they open the front door, the overpowering, metallic stench of fresh blood makes them gag. Following a faint, muffled sob, they open a nearby closet and discover the village chief's young daughter, Zia's childhood friend, quivering in fear. Realizing that the house is a death trap, the three of them sprint back out into the open. Just as utter despair sets in, the bright beams of car headlights cut through the distant darkness. Believing it to be their salvation, Dika runs out into the middle of the road, frantically waving his arms. But a second later, pure regret washes over them. The vehicle is not coming to rescue them at all. The headlights warp and distort, transforming into the glowing golden eyes of the demonic entities. Dika is instantly seized by the supernatural force, hoisted high into the sky, and his leg is brutally torn from his body. Watching her boyfriend get ripped apart right before her eyes destroys Zia's mental stability, and she passes out from the sheer trauma. Meanwhile, the grandfather desperately makes his way to the village chief's house. In the chaos of trying to save the youth, he accidentally dropped his protective spiritual amulet. With the entities roaming the dark outside, traversing the village without an amulet means certain death. He begs the village chief to lend him a spare talisman. The chief, showing rare generosity, unclasps his own protective amulet and hands it over to the old man. But as the village chief turns to lock his door, a blood-curdling scream pierces the room. It is his wife. The golden-eyed specters have bypassed the perimeter and are hovering right outside their window. The chief rushes to slam the shutters shut, but it is already too late. His wife is seized by an invisible, crushing force, and her chest violently bursts open with blood. Though the chief fires his shotgun wildly at the windows to drive the entities back, his wife tragically draws her last breath in his arms. When Zia finally regains consciousness, she finds herself bound to a wooden chair inside a derelict, crumbling shack. Standing before her is a blind man, his face twisted in a look of profound, venomous hatred. He mutters to himself hysterically, "This year, this year, this year." This man has spent the last 10 years hiding on the outskirts of the village, holding onto a massive 5-meter-long ritual totem pole. Because he lacked the protection of a mystical amulet, he has lived every single day in absolute, paralyzing terror of the Kromoleo. In a desperate bid to ensure he would never accidentally look into the golden eyes of those terrible specters, he had brutally blinded himself. Now, by a twist of fate, the daughter of the very demon who caused his suffering sits tied upright in front of him. He swears to make Zia bleed for every ounce of agony he has endured over the past decade. He raises his weapon, ready to end her life. At the critical moment, Zia leverages her remaining strength, kicking a heavy object over to knock the blind man off balance. Hearing the gunshot echo through the mountains, the grandfather rushes up the slopes just in time. He subdues the blind assailant, permanently neutralizing the threat, and unties Zia, pulling her quickly through the dense trees. As they flee, Zia breaks down, screaming at her grandfather, demanding to know why he was so cruel 10 years ago, why he murdered her father, Jarrett, and severed his head. The grandfather sighs heavily, the weight of a decade pressing down on him, and finally confesses the darkest secret of all: her father was no longer human. The dark black magic he cultivated, known as Levulan Take, had granted him an unholy form of immortality. Merely destroying his physical flesh was useless, his severed soul still possessed the absolute power to manipulate the curse from beyond the grave. There is only one definitive way to save the village and break the curse forever: they must first fully resurrect Jarrett's physical body. Then, a direct descendant carrying his blood must take a ritual blade dyed in their own blood and pierce his heart. Only a sacrifice of his own bloodline can truly kill him and shatter the curse. Upon hearing her grandfather's cold words, Zia's sanity completely breaks. For all these years, she had deeply missed her father. Now, finding out that he can be brought back to life only so she can murder him with her own hands is too much to bear. She weeps hysterically, begging her grandfather to find another way and let her father rest, but the old man's resolve is absolute. He offers Zia no choice. He draws a small ritual knife and slices open her palm, coating the blade in her fresh, crimson blood. He intends to use this blade to force an end to the nightmare. Horrified by the merciless righteousness of her grandfather, Zia grows frantic. Paralyzed by the madness surrounding her, the grandfather realizes he can no longer reason with her. He rips his own protective amulet off his neck, drops it by her side, and turns to venture into the dark alone to finish the deed. He thinks everyone left in this cursed place has lost their minds. But he doesn't make it far before doom catches up to him. Without the protection of an amulet, he instantly becomes a beacon for the golden-eyed demons. Though the seasoned grandfather manages to blast one of the entities away with his hunting gun, the sheer volume of the horde overwhelms him. Nearby, Zia is suddenly ambushed, a demonic specter clamping its cold hand around her throat. Seeing his granddaughter on the verge of death, the grandfather uses his final strength to throw his remaining amulet across the clearing to her. The talisman's burst of energy saves Zia's life, but the force sends her rolling helplessly down a steep, rocky hill. Though devastated to see his granddaughter fall into the ravine, the grandfather knows time has run out. He stumbles into an abandoned, hidden warehouse where he has kept Jarrett's headless, preserved corpse hidden for 10 years. He retrieves Jarrett's severed head from a mysterious, dust-covered iron box. He is about to initiate the final, volatile resurrection ritual. He carefully aligns the severed head back onto the cold shoulders of the corpse. But just as he raises the blood-stained dagger to complete the final binding step, the blind man, who had survived the earlier encounter, creeps up behind him like a silent ghost. Driven by blind madness, the assailant launches a vicious surprise attack from the shadows, sending the grandfather crashing to the ground, mortally wounded. Simultaneously, out in the dark forest, the isolated Zia is surrounded by the golden-eyed phantoms once more. Lacking any amulet protection, she is trapped like a lamb brought to the slaughter. Within moments, the spectral manifestation of her father's vengeful soul pins her to the earth, raising a hand to take her life. But at that exact split second, the phantom dissolves into a cloud of thick black smoke, releasing its grip. Deep inside the warehouse, the resurrection ritual has succeeded. Jarrett slowly opens his biological eyes inside the warehouse, fully reanimated. He looks up to see the blind man standing over his dying father-in-law. Realizing the ancient demon has awakened, the blind man's cruel smile vanishes. He drops to his knees, weeping and begging for mercy. But Jarrett shows no mercy. He lunges forward, tears out the man's throat, and greedily drinks the fresh, warm blood. With the influx of fresh blood, Jarrett's unholy dark magic returns to its absolute peak. He turns his gaze toward his dying father-in-law, his eyes burning with 10 years of unadulterated malice. He vows to inflict double the agony he suffered while trapped in that iron box. Just as Jarrett raises his hand to violently end the old man's life, Zia bursts through the warehouse doors. The daughter who had been separated from him for 10 long years screams for her father to stop. The father and daughter embrace in a tight, emotional hug. Zia weeps into his chest, begging him to cast away his ancient hatred and stop the senseless slaughter. But Jarrett's soul has been entirely consumed by the black magic. He cold-heartedly pushes his daughter aside, raising his weapon once more to execute the grandfather. He bellows in rage, promising to hunt down every single lineage of the villagers who betrayed him. Seeing the man who is both her biological father and an unholy monster about to commit another atrocity, Zia finally accepts her grim destiny. She snatches up the ritual knife coated in her own blood and drives it deep into her father's chest. Jarrett freezes. He turns his head slowly, his eyes wide with shock, confusion, and betrayal as he looks at his daughter. But as the dark magic begins to rapidly drain from his body, the anger in his eyes softens, melting into a final, peaceful sense of relief. He collapses gently into his daughter's arms, closing his eyes for eternity. Zia believes the nightmare has finally ended with Jarrett's definitive death. She helps her severely injured grandfather out of the warehouse, preparing to leave this cursed valley forever. But as they step into the dim light of dawn, Zia's surviving childhood friend emerges from the tree line, pointing a loaded gun directly at them. Driven completely insane by the horrific events of the night, the girl blames the entire Zia family line for the brutal death of her mother. Blinded by grief, she pulls the trigger. In a final act of absolute redemption, the grandfather throws his fragile body in front of Zia, taking the incoming bullet directly to the torso. Using the very last spark of his fading life force, the grandfather flings the ritual dagger across the clearing, striking the crazed girl dead. He then collapses into Zia's arms, rapidly dying from catastrophic blood loss. Zia's psychological stability completely shatters. She lies paralyzed on the dirt floor of the warehouse, pinned between the fresh corpses of her father and her grandfather. Her eyes are completely hollow, devoid of any humanity. Then, a disturbing mutation takes hold. She slowly reaches down, picks up the blood-slicked ritual dagger from the floor, draws the blade across her tongue, and licks the dark blood away. The very next second, Her pupils violently dilate and transform into a bright, glowing, demonic golden yellow, the exact same eyes as her father. The severe wounds and cuts covering her body begin to stitch themselves back together, healing. At a speed visible to the naked eye, it becomes terrifyingly clear. Zia has just inherited everything from her father, including the immortal, inescapable curse of the Kromoleo. As the sun fully rises, a lone girl, drenched from head to toe in thick human blood, walks down the deserted dirt road out of the village. Her eyes no longer hold any trace of grief or sadness, there is only an endless, cold, echoing void of resentment. The village's nightmare did not end with Jarrett. A far greater, more terrifying crisis has just been born. So, do you still believe that blood is thicker than water?